Have you ever felt like no one tells the truth about women anymore? That every conversation is either blind worship or bitter resentment, never clarity or honesty? Society idealizes women as pure, nurturing, and morally superior. But what if this image is a carefully crafted illusion, a shimmering mirage obscuring a deeper reality? And what if one of history's most penetrating psychologists, Carl Jung, saw through it over a century ago? Jung was not afraid to plunge into the depths that others shied away from. He didn't hate women, nor did he romanticize them with shallow praise. While most thinkers of his time either dismissed women as secondary or elevated them to saintly pedestals, Jung went further, much further. He asked, what lies beneath the surface? Not what men want women to be, not the roles they've been assigned, but what they truly are beneath the social masks, beneath the ideals, beneath the archetypes they've been forced to wear. He saw something uncomfortable, something raw, something few dare to confront even today. Not because it's offensive, but because it's true. And truth, as Jung knew, often cuts deeper than any blade. He believed that the relationship between men and women was not built on equality or love in the sentimental storybook sense, but on projection, instinct, and the unseen tides of the unconscious mind. The more you look around today, at the games of modern romance, the curated personas online, the unspoken tensions, the more his vision seems not just accurate, but prophetic. This isn't a script about blame. It's not about glorifying men or tearing down women. It's about facing a deeper truth, one that reveals the hidden forces pulsing behind gender, attraction, and control. Jung didn't offer answers wrapped in soft comfort. He offered something far more valuable: the chance to see clearly, to peel back the layers of illusion and gaze into the abyss of the human psyche. So if you're tired of the lies, if you're ready to see beyond the romantic illusions and face the raw, unapologetic truth, then stay with me. Because once you understand how Jung saw women, you may never look at love, power, or identity the same way again. Let's break it down, layer by layer. Jung believed that men do not truly love women as individuals. They love an idea of women, a projection he termed the anima, an inner feminine archetype that men carry within their unconscious. This is no mere fantasy. It's a carefully constructed illusion that makes men feel safe, inspired, even superior, as if they've found the missing piece of their soul. He saw this romantic idealization as a dangerous lie. Not dangerous to women alone, but to the psyche itself, one that paints women as inherently pure, innocent, delicate, and emotionally elevated, a beacon of virtue in a chaotic world. But for Jung, this wasn't admiration. It was a form of self-deception, a refusal to see the full spectrum of the feminine. In Psychology and Alchemy, he describes the anima as the archetype of life itself, a force both creative and destructive, yet men often reduce it to a sanitized ideal. To him, the perfect woman was not a reflection of reality, but a mirror of man's own longing, a fantasy crafted by men who couldn't or wouldn't handle the raw, untamed complexity of the feminine psyche. Instead of facing that complexity with its beauty and its shadows, men shrink women into symbols of virtue, of beauty, of emotional salvation. And in doing so, they rob women of their depth, their agency, turning them into characters in a drama scripted by male yearning. Jung found this not only dishonest, but stifling, a betrayal of the soul's potential. He argued that men lie to themselves because they cannot bear the full truth of what women are: intuitive, multifaceted, driven by their own unconscious currents. Not better or worse than men, but different, mysterious. Not because they're unknowable, but because men choose not to know. They'd rather cling to their fantasy than dive into the reality. This mask of idealization, Jung believed, was not a sign of love but of fear. Fear of the unknown. Fear of the feminine depths that threaten to unravel the tidy narratives men construct. Fear of a woman who doesn't conform to the anima's script. So men dress their fear up as adoration, call it romance, weave it into poetry and promises, and fool even themselves. But when reality breaks through, when the ideal cracks and the real woman steps forth, with her flaws, her strength, her unscripted will, men often feel betrayed, lost, adrift, not because she changed, but because the illusion they projected couldn't hold. Jung, ever the seeker of psychic truth, saw this as one of society's deepest delusions, that to love women, men must first blind themselves to who women really are, trading awareness for comfort, reality for a dream. Jung never saw women as weak, far from it. He saw them as vessels of a different kind of strength, one that doesn't roar but reverberates through the soul. While men often display their power in obvious external ways, through action, dominance, ambition, or the conquest of the material world, Jung believed that women had cultivated a more subtle, internal form of influence, not less potent, just less overt. He saw this as a manifestation of their deep connection to the collective unconscious, that vast reservoir of archetypes and instincts shared by all humanity. In the Archetypes and the Collective Unconscious, he writes, "Woman is compensatorily as strong as man, but her strength lies elsewhere." For most of history, women were denied access to formal power. They couldn't rule nations, lead armies, or claim the thrones of empires. So instead, they adapted. They turned inward. They learned to navigate from the shadows of the psyche, through intuition, through empathy, through an emotional depth that men often overlooked. And while men built their kingdoms with steel and stone, with proclamations and wars, women shaped the men who built those kingdoms, quietly, invisibly, irrevocably. Jung noticed how women could guide souls without dictating terms, inspire loyalty without issuing commands, and secure devotion without ever needing to ask. Their power was relational, archetypal, rooted in a profound awareness of human longing, fear, and aspiration. They understood what moved men, not just desire or ego, but the deeper currents of the unconscious, and they learned how to touch those forces without clashing head-on. Not out of malice, but survival. A survival honed over centuries of exclusion. He admired this, but he also urged men to wake up to it. Because while this kind of power is harder to see, it's also harder to resist. It seeps into the cracks of the psyche, shaping from within. Jung believed that women had an instinct for the unseen, a way of steering lives without others realizing they were being led, like a river carving stone over eons. In this sense, he saw them not as victims of history, but as quiet navigators within it, threading their influence through the fabric of human experience. This wasn't flattery, it was a challenge to the naive assumptions of his time and ours. Society painted women as passive, dependent, ornamental. Jung saw them as intuitive, resilient, fiercely attuned to the currents beneath the surface. Masters of a strength that whispers where others shout. He wasn't blaming them for this. He was simply stating what few dared to say out loud, that in the realm of human connection, the most powerful presence is often the one that moves unseen, unnoticed until its work is done. Jung believed that human beings are not driven by truth. They are driven by symbols, by shadows, by the archetypes that dance beneath the surface of awareness. In women, he saw this instinct elevated to an art form, not out of superficiality, but out of necessity. A necessity born of a world that denied them direct agency. In a society where power was measured by swords, votes, or wealth, all withheld from women, Jung believed they learned to thrive through archetype, through performance, through the careful crafting of presence. He didn't accuse women of being inauthentic, far from it. In Symbols of Transformation, he marvels at how the feminine psyche aligns with the eternal. To Jung, the way women present themselves is not vanity, it's instinct, a profound attunement to the symbolic order. Their beauty, their grace, their social intelligence. These are not mere ornaments, they are bridges to the unconscious, tools of influence forged in the crucible of limitation. In a society that reduces their value to how they are seen, women learn early that influence over perception is influence over destiny. That to shape how others see you is to shape what they do, what they feel, what they become. And while many dismissed this as mere femininity, a frivolous concern with appearance, Jung saw it as profound psychological insight, a mastery of the symbolic realm. Women, he believed, have an intuitive grasp of the archetypal. They understand that people don't connect with reality as it is. They connect with what they dream reality could be, with the myths they tell themselves. By shaping how they are perceived, through a glance, a gesture, a carefully chosen word, women don't just react to the world, they mold it, they weave it, they call forth its hidden possibilities. This is why Jung believed the question of truth is never simple when it comes to human interaction, because in a world where symbols hold power, the will to embody becomes just as vital, if not more, than the will to exist. Women, through centuries of exclusion, refined this into a skill few recognize for what it truly is. A quiet, persistent mastery of the unseen that stirs everything beneath it. A dance of shadows that moves the world without breaking its silence. Jung did not see love as a peaceful union. He saw it as a collision of souls, a meeting of two opposing energies beneath the illusion of harmony. A crucible where the unconscious reveals itself. Men and women, in his view, were not naturally aligned, but inherently in tension, each drawn to the other through the magnetic pull of their inner opposites. They desired each other, yes, but through entirely different lenses, and that difference created a dance, a beautiful, chaotic dance, disguised as unity. He believed that men loved from a place of projection. They cast their anima onto women, expecting wholeness, beauty, emotional completion, as if women could heal the fracture within their own souls. In Ion, he describes the anima as a natural temptress, not because women seduce, but because men see in them the promise of redemption. Women, on the other hand, loved with sharper instincts. For them, love was less about fantasy and more about integration, about finding balance, strength, or meaning in a world that offered them little else. These were not conscious strategies, Jung argued, but unconscious ones, driven by biology, culture, and the deep pull of the psyche. Man seeking his lost feminine, woman seeking her anchor in the masculine. What disturbed him most was the denial of it all, the way society dressed up this tension in poetry and flowers, calling it romance, papering over the cracks with sweet nothings. Beneath that softness, Jung saw longing. He saw conflict. He saw two forces reflecting each other, completing each other, wrestling with each other under the pretense of union. In this sense, love was not the end of separation. It was its most seductive form, a mirror held up to the soul's divided nature. Jung didn't blame women for this, nor did he blame men. He blamed the illusion that love was simple, equal, or free from the unconscious. He believed that every relationship was at its core a meeting of shadows, one that most people never acknowledged, never dared to explore. And because they didn't see it, they stumbled through it, mistaking projection for connection, need for devotion. For Jung, true understanding only begins when we stop pretending the tension isn't real, when we stop expecting fusion and begin accepting the raw, often chaotic dynamics that shape human desire. Love, in his view, was not a resolution, it was a mirror. And like all mirrors, it came with hidden depths, reflections that reveal more than they resolve. Jung believed that morality was never absolute. It was always a construct, shaped by the psyche to navigate the chaos of existence. When it came to women, he saw morality not as a deep ethical code etched in stone, but as an instinctive adaptation, a way to bridge the conscious and the unconscious. It wasn't about truth. It was about connection, about survival in a world where raw power had long belonged to men. He argued that women didn't cling to morality for its own sake, but for what it allowed them to preserve, to protect, to create. In the structure and dynamics of the psyche, he hints at how the feminine often aligns with the role of the caregiver, not out of weakness, but out of an innate drive to weave order from disorder. Women turn to virtues like compassion, patience, selflessness. They created a framework where their gifts were honored, not because they were universally true, but because they were psychologically effective, a way to resonate with the collective soul. Morality became a tool to gain influence in a world that refused them authority outright, a way to speak to the unconscious needs of others. Jung didn't see this as pretense. He saw it as brilliance, a quiet alignment with the archetypal currents that flow beneath society's surface. Women, he thought, had perfected the ability to embody these virtues, making what was once a limitation seem like a higher calling, a sacred duty. And society, eager to maintain its myths of order and goodness, accepted this without question, embracing the illusion as truth. But his view was not sentimental, far from it. He believed that beneath this surface of virtue lay a deeper instinct, an instinct for harmony, for influence, for preservation. When women spoke of kindness, he heard attunement to the unseen. When they invoked morality, he saw adaptation, not out of deceit, but necessity, a necessity born of a world that demanded they find power in softness. To Jung, the moral posture was never neutral. It was performance, but a performance of profound depth. And in women, shaped for centuries by interdependence, it became a way of navigating a hostile world without ever appearing to resist. Not with force, but with presence, with emotion, with silence. A silent resonance that disarmed without ever revealing its source. A thread of the psyche that binds without breaking. Jung lived in a time when women were expected to be passive, obedient, confined to domestic spheres, their voices muted by the weight of tradition. But even then, he saw the tide turning. He saw the early signs of a shift. Women beginning to question, to explore, to step beyond the roles history had carved for them like rigid stone tablets. And he wasn't surprised. He was intrigued, even awed. He believed that women's strength had always been underestimated, not because it was invisible, but because it was veiled, cloaked in the archetypes of mother, lover, muse. For centuries, their power was subtle, indirect, dressed in softness, flowing through the undercurrents of the psyche, rather than the surface of society. But what happens when that power no longer hides? What happens when women stop needing men for definition, approval, or identity? When they cease to be the anima's reflection and become their own center. Jung sensed that the rise of the individuated woman, a woman who has faced her own shadow, integrated her own opposites, would shake the foundations of society to its core. Not because he thought women were incapable, but because he believed most men weren't ready, weren't prepared to meet a force that no longer mirrored their projections. In Modern Man in Search of a Soul, he warns of the upheaval that comes when the unconscious is unleashed. The average man, raised to see himself as the axis of meaning, would feel unmoored, threatened, even betrayed by a woman who no longer needed his strength, his income, his validation to define her existence. And that unease would not manifest as awe or respect. It would manifest as confusion, as resentment, as a scrambling to reclaim a lost narrative. This wasn't judgment. It was observation, a psychological prophecy. Jung knew that a woman freed from projection becomes a force of nature, no longer confined to emotional resonance or moral archetypes. She becomes direct, self-aware, unapologetically whole, a being in the process of individuation. And that kind of woman, Jung believed, would challenge a world built on comforting myths, on the assumption that women exist to complete men rather than themselves. He didn't write this as celebration or critique. He wrote it as a recognition that the future would not be shaped by balance, but by awakening, by a seismic shift in the psychic landscape. The rise of the individuated woman wouldn't create peace. It would provoke tension, uncertainty, and a painful redefinition of identity for both sexes. Because when women stop mirroring, when they step out of the anima's shadow and into their own light, the old world loses its reflection, its anchor, its illusion of control. For Jung, that was both inevitable and transformative, a necessary chaos on the path to wholeness. Jung didn't write about women to diminish them. He wrote to illuminate the psyche, to map its contours, because for him, truth was sacred, even when it was unsettling, even when it tore through the veils of convention. But what many misunderstand is that his psychology wasn't rooted in division. It was rooted in wholeness, in the belief that beneath the projections and shadows lies the potential for integration. He saw possibility beyond the endless games of projection, dependence, and denial. He saw the chance for something higher, something rare. Jung believed that most relationships between men and women were built on mutual projection, each casting archetypes onto the other, each hiding their shadows, each trying to complete a puzzle without admitting they were lost in their own fragments. Men see women as the anima, the missing feminine. Women see men as the animus, the rational force they'd been denied. But what happens when both sides face the mirror? When man no longer seeks his anima in her form, and woman no longer shapes herself to his longing? When neither seeks completion through illusion or need, but instead stands in full awareness of who and what they are, shadows and all. This, Jung suggested, was rare but not impossible. In the Red Book, he speaks of the soul's journey toward itself, a journey that demands the death of fantasy, the rejection of inherited roles, the courage to meet each other not as ideals or opposites, but as individuals in power, in shadow, and in potential. Not the same, but equally incomplete, equally capable of growth, equally on the path to individuation. To reach this point, one must abandon projection. The man must let go of his need for her to save him, to fill his emptiness. The woman must let go of her need to be seen through him, to borrow his strength. Only then can something deeper emerge, not a fusion of the sexes, not a sentimental reconciliation, but a redefinition of what it means to connect, to stand together as two wholes rather than two halves. Jung didn't promise that this was easy. He knew most would never reach it, trapped as they are in the comfort of illusion, the safety of projection. But for those who could, those willing to abandon comfort for truth, illusion for reality, a new kind of relationship could form, one not based on projection or fear, but on shared wholeness, not completion but mutual becoming, a union of souls that honors the individual within the collective, the shadow within the light.